She was about to be discharged. Then the enemy sniper asked, "Is she still alive today?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the military hospital compound as Sarah Martinez packed her few belongings into a worn duffel bag. After 18 months of service as a combat medic in the conflict zone, she was finally going home. The discharge papers sat neatly folded in her breast pocket, stamped and signed just hours earlier. Tomorrow she would board a transport plane that would take her far away from the sounds of distant artillery and the smell of antiseptic that had become her daily reality. Sarah had seen more trauma in these months than most people witness in a lifetime. She had pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, performed emergency surgery under fire, and held the hands of young men as they took their final breaths. The weight of these experiences had carved lines into her 24-year-old face, but they had also forged her into someone stronger than she ever imagined possible. The field hospital where she worked sat on the edge of what the military called a contested zone. It was a place where the front lines shifted daily, where safety was always temporary, and where the enemy could be watching from any direction. The building itself was a converted school, its classrooms now filled with medical equipment and rows of beds occupied by the wounded from both sides of the conflict. As Sarah made her final rounds that morning, she stopped at the bed of Lieutenant James Rodriguez, a young tank commander who had lost his left leg to an improvised explosive device 3 weeks earlier. His recovery had been slow but steady, and Sarah had grown fond of his optimistic spirit despite everything he had endured. "So this is really it, Doc?" Rodriguez asked, using the nickname all the soldiers had given her despite her not being a doctor. "You're really leaving us tomorrow?" Sarah smiled and adjusted his blanket. "My replacement arrived yesterday. She's good, really good. You'll be in excellent hands." She paused, looking around the ward filled with recovering soldiers. "Besides, you won't need much more medical care. You'll be heading home yourself soon enough." Rodriguez nodded, but his expression grew serious. "You know, Doc, I've been thinking about something. We've all heard the stories about that sniper out there, the one they call the Ghost. He's been watching this place for months, picking off anyone who gets too close to the perimeter. But he's never taken a shot at you, not once, even when you've been out in the open helping bring in casualties." Sarah had heard the same stories. The enemy sniper had become something of a legend among the troops. He was incredibly skilled, able to hit targets from distances that seemed impossible. Military intelligence believed he had been responsible for at least 30 casualties over the past 6 months. Yet somehow, in all her time running between the hospital and the landing zones where helicopters brought in the wounded, she had never been targeted. "Maybe I've just been lucky," Sarah replied, though she had wondered about it herself. "Or maybe," Rodriguez said quietly, "he's been watching you save lives instead of taking them. Maybe even he has some respect for what you do." The conversation was interrupted by the familiar sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Sarah looked out the window and saw a medical evacuation helicopter coming in fast, its red cross marking clearly visible against the desert camouflage. Black smoke was trailing from its engine, and it was flying lower than usual. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and ran toward the landing zone, her heart racing. The helicopter touched down hard, kicking up clouds of dust and sand. Before the rotors had even stopped spinning, the crew was already pulling stretchers from the aircraft. "What do we have?" Sarah called out as she reached the first stretcher. "2 critical, 1 walking wounded," shouted the flight medic over the noise of the dying engine. "Convoy hit an IED about 15 kilometers north. These 2 took the worst of it." Sarah looked down at the first casualty and felt her stomach drop. It was a young woman, probably no older than 20, wearing the uniform of a military police officer. Her face was pale and her breathing was shallow and rapid. Blood was seeping through the bandages wrapped around her torso. "Get her to OR2 now," Sarah commanded, running alongside the stretcher as they rushed toward the hospital. The second casualty was conscious but had suffered severe burns to his arms and face. The walking wounded turned out to be a sergeant who had caught shrapnel in his shoulder, but was otherwise stable. For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked alongside the surgical team to save the lives of the 2 critical patients. The young military police officer, whose name was Private Lisa Chen, required multiple surgeries to repair internal bleeding and remove shrapnel from her abdomen. The burned soldier, Corporal Mike Thompson, needed extensive treatment for his burns and smoke inhalation. As the sun began to set, both patients had been stabilized and moved to the recovery ward. Sarah sat in the break room, finally allowing herself a moment to rest. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, and she realized that this would likely be her last emergency surgery in this place. Dr. Williams, the chief surgeon, found her there an hour later. He was a veteran Army doctor who had served in multiple conflicts, and his calm demeanor had been a source of strength for the entire medical team. "Hell of a way to spend your last day," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always brewing in the corner. "Just glad we could save them both," Sarah replied. "Chen was touch and go for a while there. She's lucky you were here. Your replacement is good, but she doesn't have your experience with trauma surgery under pressure." Dr. Williams sat down across from her. "You know, Sarah, I've served with a lot of medics over the years. What you've done here, the lives you've saved, it's going to matter long after you're gone." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. Despite the exhaustion and the emotional toll of her service, she knew she had made a difference. She had kept her oath to do no harm and to preserve life wherever possible. As darkness fell over the compound, Sarah made one final check on her patients. Private Chen was sleeping peacefully, her vital signs stable. Corporal Thompson was awake and talking quietly with his wife over a satellite phone connection. Lieutenant Rodriguez gave her a thumbs up from across the ward. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah looked up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, she would see different stars from the window of an airplane carrying her home. But tonight she was still here, still responsible for the lives in her care, still the person who had chosen to heal rather than harm in a place where violence was the norm. She had no way of knowing that someone else was also looking at those same stars, someone who had been watching her work from a distance for months, someone who had made a choice of his own about the young medic who ran fearlessly into danger to save lives. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything she thought she knew about this place and the enemies who fought here. The alarm that shattered the pre-dawn quiet was different from the usual incoming rocket alerts. This was the sharp, urgent tone that meant ground attack imminent. Sarah jolted awake in her narrow cot, muscle memory taking over as she grabbed her boots and medical bag. Outside her window, she could see soldiers running across the compound, taking defensive positions behind concrete barriers and sandbags. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom system. "All medical personnel to emergency stations. We have reports of enemy movement on the perimeter. This is not a drill." Sarah's heart sank as she realized what this meant. Her transport flight was scheduled to depart in just 3 hours. The cargo plane that would take her home was already on the runway, being fueled for the journey. But if the compound was under attack, no flights would be leaving until the situation was secure. She ran through the corridors toward the main medical bay, where other staff members were already preparing for potential casualties. Dr. Williams was barking orders to nurses and orderlies, making sure emergency supplies were ready and operating rooms were prepared. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, the result of months of practice and experience. "Sarah, I thought you were supposed to be gone by now," called out Nurse Patricia Hayes, a tough woman from Texas who had become one of Sarah's closest friends during their deployment. "So did I," Sarah replied, checking her medical supplies. "Looks like the war had other plans." Through the reinforced windows, they could see muzzle flashes in the distance as the perimeter guards engaged with enemy forces. The sound of gunfire was sporadic but growing more intense. Intelligence reports had indicated increased enemy activity in the area over the past week, but a direct assault on the hospital compound was unexpected. The first casualties began arriving within an hour. They were soldiers from the outer checkpoints who had taken enemy fire while trying to hold their positions. Sarah worked quickly and efficiently, treating gunshot wounds and shrapnel injuries while the battle raged outside. Each time she glanced toward the runway, she could see her transport plane still sitting there, surrounded by military personnel who were obviously waiting for the all-clear to proceed with evacuation flights. As the morning progressed, the intensity of the fighting seemed to decrease. The perimeter guards had managed to push back the initial assault, and reports indicated that most of the enemy forces had withdrawn to positions further out in the desert. However, military protocol required a full security sweep of the area before any aircraft could safely depart. It was during a brief lull in casualties that Sergeant Martinez from base security approached Sarah in the medical bay. He looked nervous, which was unusual for a veteran soldier who had served multiple tours in combat zones. "Doc, we got a situation that's got everyone scratched heads," he said, lowering his voice. "During the firefight this morning, one of our patrols found something strange out by the north perimeter fence." Sarah looked up from the supply inventory she was completing. "What kind of something?" Sergeant Martinez glanced around to make sure no one else was listening closely. "It's a message, Doc, written in English on a piece of cloth tied to the fence, and it asks about you specifically." The color drained from Sarah's face. "What do you mean it asks about me?" "I mean it mentions you by name. Asks if you're still alive and if you're really leaving today. Command wants to see you right away to discuss it." Sarah's mind raced as she followed Sergeant Martinez through the corridors toward the command center. Who could possibly know her name and her departure schedule? The enemy forces in the area were supposed to be irregulars with limited intelligence capabilities. How could they have such specific information about her personally? The command center was buzzing with activity as officers analyzed patrol reports and coordinated with intelligence units. Colonel Patricia Stone, the base commander, looked up as Sarah entered. She was a stern woman in her 40s who had earned the respect of every soldier under her command through her fair leadership and tactical expertise. "Medic Martinez, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." The colonel gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I'm sure Sergeant Martinez has told you about the message we discovered." Sarah nodded, still trying to process what this could mean. Colonel Stone picked up a plastic evidence bag containing a piece of white cloth with neat handwriting in black ink. The message reads, "To the American medic Sarah Martinez who saves lives without seeing uniforms. You were to leave today. Is she still alive? Has the fighting taken her?" It's signed with what appears to be a symbol rather than a name. Sarah stared at the message, feeling a chill run down her spine. Someone out there knew not just her name, but her philosophy about treating all wounded soldiers regardless of which side they fought for. During her deployment, she had indeed treated enemy prisoners with the same care she gave to American forces, believing that her medical oath transcended political boundaries. "Colonel, I don't understand. How could enemy forces know these details about me?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Colonel Stone replied. "Intelligence believes this message came from the sniper they call the Ghost. The one who's been operating in this area for months but has never taken a shot at medical personnel." The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. The mysterious sniper who seemed to respect medical personnel. The fact that she had never been targeted despite spending countless hours in exposed positions while helping wounded soldiers. Someone had been watching her, learning about her, perhaps even protecting her. Dr. Williams, who had been quietly standing in the corner of the room, spoke up. "Sarah, I know this is unusual, but Colonel Stone and I have been discussing the situation. Given the specific nature of this message, we think it might be worth considering a response." Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "A response? You want me to communicate with an enemy sniper?" "Not exactly," Colonel Stone interjected. "But we think there might be an opportunity here. If this person has been watching our medical operations and respects what you do, there might be a chance for some kind of humanitarian communication. Maybe even information that could help us save lives on both sides." The idea was both terrifying and intriguing. Sarah had always believed that medicine could transcend political conflicts, but she had never imagined a scenario where she might actually communicate with an enemy combatant about their shared respect for human life. "What kind of response are you talking about?" she asked carefully. "Something simple," Colonel Stone explained. "Just confirmation that you're alive and well, and perhaps acknowledgement of their message. Nothing that could compromise security, but something that might open a dialogue about medical neutrality in this conflict." Sarah thought about all the wounded soldiers she had treated, both American and enemy prisoners. She thought about the young medics on both sides who risked their lives to save others. If there was even a small chance that communication with this sniper could lead to better protection for medical personnel, wasn't it worth considering? "If I were to do this," Sarah said slowly, "what guarantees would I have for my safety? And what about the safety of everyone else here? The sniper has had numerous opportunities to target you and hasn't taken any of them," Dr. Williams pointed out. "If anything, his message suggests he's been protecting you. As for everyone else, our security measures remain the same regardless." As Sarah sat in the command center, surrounded by maps and radio equipment, she realized that her simple departure home had suddenly become something much more complex. The war that she thought she was leaving behind was now asking her to make a decision that could have consequences far beyond her own fate. Outside, Her transport plane still sat on the runway, waiting. But now Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to board it, even if the security situation cleared up. Someone out there in the desert, someone she had never met but who apparently knew her well, was asking if she was still alive. The question was whether she was brave enough to answer. The decision to respond to the mysterious message weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she returned to the medical bay. Her colleagues noticed her distracted state as she mechanically checked on patients and updated medical charts. Private Chen, who was recovering well from her surgery the previous day, was the first to comment. "Doc, you look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay?" Sarah managed a weak smile. "Just thinking about the flight home. Looks like it might be delayed a bit longer due to the security situation." But it wasn't just the delayed flight that was troubling her. Colonel Stone had given her until the end of the day to decide whether she wanted to participate in what the military was calling a humanitarian communication experiment. The idea of intentionally making contact with an enemy combatant went against every security protocol she had learned. Yet something about the respectful tone of the message intrigued her. Dr. Williams found her during the afternoon shift change. "Walk with me," he said quietly, leading her toward a small courtyard behind the main medical building where they could speak privately. "I know this is a difficult decision," he began, settling onto a concrete bench that someone had fashioned from supply crates. "I want you to know that no one expects you to do this. Your service here has been exemplary, and you've earned your ticket home." Sarah sat beside him, watching a small lizard dart across the sandy ground. "It's not about earning anything. It's about what's right. If this sniper really has been protecting medical personnel, if he genuinely respects what we do here, then maybe there's an opportunity to save lives. Or maybe it's a trap," Dr. Williams said gently. "We have to consider that possibility too." "I know. But I keep thinking about something Lieutenant Rodriguez said yesterday. He wondered if the sniper respected medical personnel because we heal instead of harm. What if he's right? What if there's someone out there who sees the humanity in what we do, even across enemy lines?" Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah's face.
"You've made up your mind, haven't you?"
Sarah nodded slowly. "I think I have, but I need to understand exactly what Colonel Stone is proposing." They returned to the command center where Colonel Stone was reviewing intelligence reports with her staff. When she saw Sarah approaching, she gestured for her to join a smaller group gathered around a communication station. "Medic Martinez, have you given our proposal some thought?" "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to understand the specific details of what you're asking me to do." Colonel Stone spread out a detailed map of the surrounding area on the table. "Based on ballistic analysis of previous sniper incidents, we believe the Ghost operates from this ridge approximately 800 meters north of our perimeter. It's beyond the range of our patrols, but close enough for him to observe our daily operations." She pointed to a section of the perimeter fence where the original message had been found. "We would like you to place a response message at the same location where his message was discovered. Nothing that compromises operational security. Just a simple acknowledgement that you received his communication and that you're safe." Captain Rodriguez from Intelligence leaned forward. "The key is to keep the message humanitarian in nature. No military information, no operational details. Just medical personnel to medical personnel, if that's what this is." Sarah studied the map, noting the clear sight lines from the ridge to the hospital compound. If someone had been watching from that position, they would indeed have had an excellent view of all the medical operations, including her daily routines. "What makes you think he'll even see the response?" she asked. "Because he's been watching this place every day for months," Colonel Stone replied. "Our reconnaissance suggests he maintains a regular observation schedule. If we place your message during his usual monitoring times, there's a good chance he'll spot it." The more Sarah learned about the plan, the more it seemed like a carefully calculated risk rather than a reckless gamble. The military had clearly put considerable thought into the security implications and potential benefits. "What would happen after I leave the message? Do I stay here to see if he responds?" "That would be up to you," Colonel Stone said. "Your transport flight has already been rescheduled for tomorrow morning due to today's security incident. If you choose to participate in this communication, you could leave your message this evening and see if there's a response overnight. If there is, you could decide whether to continue the dialogue or simply acknowledge it before you depart." Sarah felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement at the prospect. Throughout her deployment, She had treated warfare as something that divided people into sides, with medical personnel trying to heal the damage that resulted. But what if there were individuals on both sides who shared a common respect for life and healing? "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But I want to write the message myself. And I want someone to review it to make sure it doesn't compromise anything." Colonel Stone nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we hoped you would say. Captain Rodriguez will work with you on the message content, and we'll have it reviewed by intelligence before you place it." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah worked with Captain Rodriguez to craft a careful response. It was more difficult than she had anticipated to write something that was genuine and humanitarian, while avoiding any information that could be useful to enemy forces. The final message read, "To the person who asked about the American medic Sarah Martinez, I am alive and well, thanks to the protection of good soldiers and perhaps the respect of honorable people on both sides who understand that healing is more important than fighting. I have seen that medical people everywhere share the same oath to preserve life. If you are such a person, know that your respect for medical neutrality has been noticed and appreciated. May all who tend to the wounded find safety in their service to humanity." Sarah read the message several times, feeling satisfied that it expressed her genuine beliefs while avoiding any operational details. Captain Rodriguez approved the content and Colonel Stone signed off after a final review. As evening approached, Sarah prepared for what might be one of the most unusual moments of her military career. She would be deliberately communicating with an enemy combatant, not as a soldier, but as a medical professional reaching across the divide of war to acknowledge a shared respect for human life. The plan was simple. Sarah would approach the perimeter fence during the evening medical rounds that she regularly conducted anyway. She would tie the message to the same section of fence where the original communication had been found, making it appear to any observer that she was simply checking the security of the medical compound perimeter. As the sun began to set, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple, Sarah folded the message carefully and placed it in her pocket. Dr. Williams and Nurse Hayes would accompany her on her rounds, providing both security and the appearance of normal medical operations. Walking toward the perimeter fence, Sarah felt her heart racing with a combination of nervousness and anticipation. She was about to do something that no military medic in her unit had ever done before. She was about to reach across the divide of war with a message of shared humanity and professional respect. Behind her, the hospital compound continued its daily operations. Wounded soldiers recovered in their beds, medical staff prepared for night shifts, and the routine of military medicine continued as it had for months. But for Sarah, this moment represented something different. Something that might transcend the boundaries that war created between people who shared the same commitment to healing. As she approached the fence, she couldn't help but look toward the distant ridge where intelligence believed the sniper maintained his observation post. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone who had chosen not to shoot. Someone who had asked a simple question about whether she was still alive. In a few moments, he would have his answer. The night shift at the field hospital was typically quiet, with most emergency cases arriving during daylight hours when military operations were more active. Sarah found it difficult to sleep, knowing that somewhere in the darkness someone might be reading her message and deciding whether to respond. She had volunteered to take the overnight medical watch, partly to stay busy, and partly because she wanted to be the first to know if there was any development. At 3 a.m, she was checking on Private Chen when she heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The impacts were distant, probably targeting one of the outer checkpoints, but they served as a reminder that the war continued even while people slept. Chen stirred in her bed, unconsciously reaching for the weapon that was no longer at her side. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, gently touching the young soldier's shoulder. "You're safe. Just some distant fire, nothing to worry about." Chen's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Doc, is that you? I thought you were supposed to be gone by now." "Change of plans. Flight got delayed. Go back to sleep." As Sarah continued her rounds, she thought about the dozens of soldiers she had treated who would carry the physical and emotional scars of this conflict for the rest of their lives. Young people like Chen, who had volunteered to serve their country and found themselves in situations they never could have imagined. The enemy sniper, whoever he was, probably had similar stories among his own people. The first gray light of dawn was appearing on the horizon, when Sarah finally allowed herself to check the perimeter fence. She approached casually, as if conducting a routine security inspection, but her heart was racing with anticipation. At first, she saw nothing unusual. The message she had left the evening before was gone, but that could mean anything. Animals might have taken it or wind might have blown it away. Then she noticed a small white object tied to a different section of fence, about 20 meters from where she had left her message. Sarah looked around to make sure she wasn't being observed by base security, then quickly retrieved the item. It was another piece of cloth, this one with writing in neat English letters. She didn't read the message immediately, instead tucking it into her jacket pocket and returning to the medical bay. Only when she was safely inside did she examine what she had found. The handwriting was the same as the original message, written carefully in black ink on clean white cloth. To Sarah Martinez, healer of soldiers, your words show wisdom beyond your years. I am Ahmed Hassan, doctor from Damascus, now forced to fight but still bound by oath to save lives when possible. Your message speaks truth. Medical people share same heart even when countries fight. I watch you treat enemy soldiers with same care as your own people. This shows true medicine has no borders. I have prevented others from targeting medical areas when I can do so safely. Tomorrow you leave, yes? If Allah wills, you will live long life and save many more lives. War and someday healing continues always, with respect for your service to humanity. Sarah read the message 3 times, feeling a mixture of amazement and profound sadness. Ahmed Hassan was a doctor, forced by circumstances to serve as a sniper but still maintaining his commitment to medical ethics. He had been protecting the hospital compound not just out of respect for medical neutrality, but because he was himself a medical professional who understood the importance of their work. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just an enemy combatant who happened to respect medical personnel. This was a colleague, someone who had taken the same oath she had taken, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with the power to heal. The war had forced him into a role that seemed to contradict his medical training. Yet he had found ways to honor his original commitment to preserving life. Sarah immediately took the message to Colonel Stone, who was already in the command center preparing for the daily briefing. The colonel read the message with raised eyebrows, then passed it to Captain Rodriguez for analysis. This changes the dynamic considerably, Colonel Stone observed. If this person is indeed a medical professional, it explains both his restraint regarding medical targets and his detailed knowledge of hospital operations. Captain Rodriguez studied the message under a magnifying glass. The handwriting is consistent with the previous message. The level of English suggests significant education, which fits with someone who attended medical school. The reference to Damascus indicates Syrian origin or training. What do we know about Syrian medical professionals who might be operating in this area? Sarah asked. Colonel Stone consulted a thick intelligence file. Actually, quite a bit. There have been reports of several doctors and nurses who were forced to flee Syria due to the conflict there. Some reportedly joined various armed groups, not necessarily by choice but because they needed protection and had valuable medical skills. The picture that was emerging was of a man caught between 2 worlds, trying to maintain his medical ethics while surviving in a combat environment. Sarah thought about her own struggles with the ethical dilemmas of military medicine, treating enemy prisoners while their comrades were shooting at her friends. At least she had the clear framework of military medical protocols to guide her decisions. Ahmed Hassan seemed to be navigating much more complicated moral territory. Colonel, I'd like to send one more message before I leave. If he really is a doctor, if he's been trying to protect medical personnel, I think he deserves to know that his efforts have been recognized. Colonel Stone considered the request carefully. What did you have in mind? Something personal. Doctor to doctor. Not military to military, just 2 medical professionals acknowledging their shared commitment to healing. After another lengthy review process, Sarah crafted a final message that she hoped would provide some comfort to a fellow medical professional trapped in an impossible situation. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, your message brings both sadness and hope. Sadness that war has forced a healer to carry weapons. Hope that the heart of a doctor still beats strong within you. I have learned much from watching how different people respond to the horrors of conflict. Some choose to increase the suffering. Others find ways to reduce it even when circumstances seem impossible. You have chosen to protect rather than destroy when you could do so safely. That choice honors your medical oath even in the darkest circumstances. I will carry your story with me and remember that healing takes many forms. When this war ends, I hope you can return to medicine full-time. The world needs doctors like you who remember their humanity, even when surrounded by inhumanity. May you find safety and may your hands return to healing rather than fighting. With deep respect, Dr. Sarah Martinez. Sarah had made a decision during the night. She had asked Colonel Stone to arrange for her to stay an additional day, officially to help with the transition to her replacement, but actually because she felt a professional obligation to complete this extraordinary dialogue with Dr. Hassan. The military had agreed, recognizing the potential intelligence and humanitarian value of the communication. That evening, as she placed her final message at the perimeter fence, Sarah looked toward the distant ridge with different eyes. Instead of seeing an enemy position, she now saw a place where a fellow doctor was struggling to maintain his ethical principles in an environment that seemed designed to destroy them. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Somewhere in that landscape, Dr. Ahmed Hassan was probably preparing for another night of conflicted duty, serving as a sniper while trying to protect medical personnel when possible. Sarah couldn't imagine the psychological burden such a position must create for someone trained to heal. As she walked back toward the hospital compound, Sarah realized that this experience had changed her understanding of war itself. Conflicts weren't just about armies and politics and territories. They were about individual people making moral choices under extreme pressure, sometimes finding ways to maintain their humanity, even when everything around them seemed inhuman. Tomorrow, she would finally board the transport plane that would take her home. But she would be carrying with her a story that she knew would affect how she practiced medicine for the rest of her career. She had learned that the commitment to healing could transcend even the most violent conflicts, creating unexpected connections between people who might otherwise be enemies. The night air was cooling as she entered the medical bay for her final shift at the field hospital. In less than 24 hours, she would be on her way home. But part of her would always remain here, connected to a fellow doctor who had reminded her why she had chosen medicine in the first place. The morning of Sarah's extended departure brought unexpected developments that would make her final day at the field hospital more memorable than she could have imagined. As she conducted her pre-dawn rounds, checking on patients who had become like family to her over the past months, she discovered that Private Chen had developed complications during the night. "Doc, something's not right," Chen whispered weakly as Sarah approached her bed. "I've got this terrible pain in my side and I can't seem to catch my breath properly." Sarah's experienced hands immediately began a careful examination. Chen's pulse was rapid and weak, her breathing shallow, and there was obvious swelling around her surgical site. The symptoms pointed to internal bleeding, possibly from a surgical site that had reopened or developed an infection. "We need to get you to surgery right away," Sarah said, signaling for Dr. Williams while trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "This looks like something we can fix, but we need to do it quickly." As the medical team prepared Chen for emergency surgery, Sarah found herself facing a dilemma she hadn't anticipated. Her transport flight was scheduled to depart in 6 hours, and Chen's surgery would likely take most of that time. Dr. Williams could certainly handle the procedure, but Sarah had developed a special connection with the young soldier and felt responsible for seeing her treatment through to completion. "Dr. Martinez, you don't have to do this," Dr. Williams said as they scrubbed in for surgery. "I can handle Chen's case and you can still make your flight home." Sarah looked through the surgical suite window at Chen, who was being prepared for anesthesia by the surgical team. The young woman had been through so much already, surviving the IED attack, enduring multiple surgeries, and now facing another life-threatening complication. "She's my patient," Sarah said simply. "I'm not leaving until I know she's going to be okay." The surgery revealed that Chen had indeed developed internal bleeding from a small blood vessel that had been weakened by the original trauma. It was a common complication, treatable with proper surgical intervention but potentially fatal if left untreated. Sarah worked with focused intensity, repairing the bleeding vessel and cleaning up the accumulated blood in Chen's abdomen. 3 hours into the surgery, Nurse Hayes entered the operating room with a message that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Doc, Colonel Stone asked me to tell you that there's been another message left at the perimeter fence. She wants you to see it as soon as you're available." Sarah's hands never paused in their surgical work, but her mind raced with possibilities. What could Dr. Hassan have to say in response to her final message? Had something happened that required immediate attention? It took another 2 hours to complete Chen's surgery successfully. By the time Sarah finally made it to the command center, her transport flight had already departed without her. She was officially stranded at the field hospital for at least another day, waiting for the next available transport. Colonel Stone was waiting for her with a grave expression. "Sarah, I'm glad you're here. We received another message from your correspondent, but this one is different. It's much longer, and it contains information that has our intelligence people very concerned." She handed Sarah a larger piece of cloth, this one covered with densely packed handwriting. As Sarah read, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Dr. Sarah Martinez, I write this message with heavy heart and great urgency. Yesterday I learned that my position has been discovered by other fighters in my group. They are angry that I have not taken opportunities to attack your medical compound. They do not understand or care about medical neutrality. They plan to replace me with someone who will not show such weakness toward enemy medical personnel. I have perhaps 1 day, maybe 2, before I must leave this position. The new sniper will not share my respect for medical oath. He will target any personnel, including medical staff, who present opportunities. I have tried to argue with commanders, but they believe my medical background makes me too soft for this assignment. I write to warn you and your colleagues. The protection you have enjoyed from my position will end soon. New sniper will likely target medical personnel during evacuation procedures, supply deliveries, and outdoor patient transfers. Please take extra precautions and inform your security people of increased danger. I also write to ask favor that weighs heavy on my conscience. There is a small village called Al-Rashid, 5 kilometers southwest of your position. Many families there, including children, have been without medical care for weeks because fighting makes travel dangerous. If possible, if your medical oath allows, could medical team visit village, not as military operation, but as doctors helping sick people? I know this request puts you in dangerous position. I know you leave soon and should not have to take such risks. But children are dying from preventable illness and I cannot help them from this position. Only request if you believe it is right thing to do as doctor. If you choose to help village, I will do everything in my power to provide protection during journey, though my influence grows weaker each day. Take medical supplies for basic treatment, antibiotics, bandages for wounds. Village elder named Mahmoud will meet any medical team and ensure safety while you treat patients. This may be my final message to you. Tomorrow or next day I will be reassigned to different area. I wanted you to know that our communication has reminded me why I became doctor originally. In world full of violence, you showed me that healing is still possible, still important, still worthy of respect even from enemies. May Allah protect you and all medical personnel who choose healing over hatred. Dr. Ahmed Hassan. Sarah read the message twice, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Dr. Hassan was being reassigned specifically because he had refused to target medical personnel. His replacement would not share his professional ethics or respect for medical neutrality. But more than that, he was asking her to risk her safety to help civilians in an area that was likely crawling with hostile forces. "What's your assessment of this intelligence?" Sarah asked Colonel Stone. "Our analysts believe the information about sniper replacement is credible. It fits with patterns we've observed in other areas where medical-friendly snipers have been replaced with more aggressive ones. As for the village request, that's obviously much more complicated." Captain Rodriguez joined the conversation. "The village of Al-Rashid is in what we call a gray area, not directly controlled by either side, but accessible to both. Intelligence suggests there are indeed civilian families there who have been cut off from medical services. However, any medical mission to that area would be extremely dangerous." Sarah stared at the map Rodriguez spread on the table. The village was located in a valley surrounded by hills that could hide enemy positions. The route would require leaving the security of the base, perimeter, and traveling through territory where they could easily be ambushed. Has there ever been a civilian medical mission like this during our deployment here? She asked. No, Colonel Stone replied. Military policy generally prohibits medical personnel from operating outside secured areas, except for combat evacuations. The risks are simply too high. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Hassan's description of children dying from preventable illnesses. As a medical professional, the idea of people suffering when she had the skills and supplies to help them was deeply troubling. This was exactly the kind of situation that had led her to choose military medicine in the first place. The opportunity to provide medical care to people who might otherwise have no access to treatment. What if it wasn't an official military mission? She asked slowly. What if it was a humanitarian effort by volunteer medical personnel? Colonel Stone and Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances. Sarah, I understand your medical instincts, but we can't authorize something like that. The liability issues alone would be staggering, not to mention the risk to personnel. I'm not asking for authorization, Sarah said quietly. I'm asking what would happen if medical personnel chose to undertake such a mission on their own, as volunteers acting under their medical oath rather than military orders. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of what she was suggesting. It would be unprecedented for military medical personnel to undertake an unauthorized humanitarian mission in a combat zone. The risks were enormous, both to the personnel involved and to the military command that would be held responsible if something went wrong. Dr. Williams, who had been listening quietly from the corner of the room, finally spoke up. Sarah, I understand what you're thinking and I admire the impulse. But you have to consider that this could be a trap. How do we know that Dr. Hassan is really who he claims to be? How do we know this isn't an elaborate setup to lure medical personnel into an ambush? It was a valid concern, one that Sarah had been wrestling with since reading the message. The entire communication could be an enemy intelligence operation designed to exploit her humanitarian instincts. Dr. Hassan could be fictional, the messages could be bait, and the village could be a carefully prepared killing ground. But something about the tone and content of the messages felt genuine to her. The specific medical knowledge, the understanding of medical ethics, the internal conflict between professional obligations and military duties, all of it resonated with her own experiences and struggles. If Dr. Hassan was fictional, his creator understood military medicine remarkably well. Give me some time to think about this, Sarah said finally, and let me talk to some of the other medical staff to get their perspectives. As she left the command center, Sarah realized that her delayed departure had presented her with a choice that would define how she remembered her military service. She could play it safe, wait for the next transport flight, and return home with the satisfaction of having served honorably in difficult circumstances. Or she could take an enormous risk to help people who desperately needed medical care, potentially validating everything she claimed to believe about the humanitarian mission of medicine. The decision would affect not just her own future, but possibly the lives of sick children in a village she had never seen, medical colleagues who might volunteer to join her, and a fellow doctor who was risking his own safety to make the mission possible. Walking through the hospital compound, Sarah looked at the wounded soldiers recovering in their beds, the medical staff working tirelessly to save lives, and the security personnel who risked their lives to protect the medical mission. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to extend that mission beyond the relative safety of the base, perimeter into territory where the only protection would come from the promise of an enemy, doctor she had never met face to face. The debate over the village medical mission lasted through the night and into the early hours of the following morning. Sarah had approached each member of the medical staff individually, explaining the situation and asking for their thoughts. The responses were mixed, but 2 volunteers emerged who were willing to risk the unauthorized humanitarian mission. Dr. Williams, despite his initial concerns about the safety of such an operation, ultimately decided that his medical oath compelled him to help if there was a genuine opportunity to save lives. Nurse Hayes, typically practical and cautious, surprised everyone by volunteering as well, stating that she hadn't joined the military medical service to hide behind walls while people suffered. If we're going to do this, Dr. Williams said during their final planning meeting, we need to do it right. Medical supplies for basic treatment, antibiotics for infections, surgical supplies for emergency procedures, and enough equipment to treat at least 50 patients. The 3 volunteers had made their decision independently of military command, making it clear that they were acting as medical professionals rather than soldiers. Colonel Stone, while unable to officially authorize the mission, had agreed not to actively prevent it, recognizing that the volunteers were acting within their rights as medical personnel to provide humanitarian aid. I can't order you to do this, and I can't order you not to do this, she had told them. But I can make sure you have the best possible communication equipment and extraction plan if things go wrong. The route to Al Rashid village would take them through territory that had changed hands several times during the conflict. Intelligence suggested that it was currently unoccupied by major military forces from either side, but that didn't mean it was safe. Small groups of fighters moved through the area regularly, and the potential for ambush was significant. Sarah had spent hours studying maps of the region, memorizing landmarks and alternative routes in case they needed to evacuate quickly. The village itself was located in a valley that provided some natural protection from observation, but getting there required crossing two ridgelines that offered excellent sniper positions. At dawn on what was supposed to be her departure day, Sarah found herself loading medical supplies into an unmarked civilian vehicle that Dr. Williams had somehow acquired through local contacts. They wore civilian clothes rather than military uniforms, carried medical identification prominently displayed, and hoped that Dr. Hassan's promise of protection would prove reliable. The first part of the journey passed without incident. The roads were rough and poorly maintained, scarred by years of conflict but passable for their four-wheel drive vehicle. They encountered no other traffic, which was both reassuring and ominous, suggesting that most sensible people avoided this area entirely. As they approached the first ridgeline, Sarah felt her heart rate increase significantly. This was exactly the kind of terrain where an ambush would be most effective. The road wound through narrow passes between rocky outcroppings that could hide dozens of armed fighters. If Dr. Hassan was not what he claimed to be, if this was indeed a trap, they were now entering the killing ground. But the ridgeline passed without incident. No shots were fired, no vehicles appeared to block their path, no signs of enemy activity were visible. Either the area was genuinely unoccupied, or someone was indeed providing protection for their passage. The village of Al-Rashid appeared in the valley below them, just as Dr. Hassan had described. It was a collection of perhaps 30 buildings, most showing signs of damage from the ongoing conflict. Smoke rose from several chimneys, indicating that the village was indeed occupied by civilians who were trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. As their vehicle entered the village, people began emerging from buildings to see who was arriving. Sarah was struck by how many children she saw, most looking thin and many showing obvious signs of illness or injury. An elderly man approached their vehicle as they parked in what appeared to be the village center. "Are you the American doctors?" he asked in accented but clear English. "I am Mahmoud, the village elder. Dr. Hassan sent word that medical people might come to help our sick." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Dr. Hassan's message had been accurate. The village contact was real, and they had apparently made the journey safely under his protection. Now came the challenging part, providing medical care to people who had been without proper treatment for weeks. The villagers had prepared the largest building in the community as a temporary clinic. Tables had been arranged to serve as examination areas, and families with sick members had already begun forming a line outside. Sarah, Dr. Williams, and Nurse Hayes quickly organized their supplies and began the process of triage, identifying the most seriously ill patients for immediate treatment. The medical problems they encountered were exactly what Dr. Hassan had described. Children with severe respiratory infections that could be easily treated with antibiotics, adults with infected wounds that needed cleaning and proper dressing, elderly people with chronic conditions that had worsened without medication. All treatable problems, but potentially fatal without proper medical intervention. Sarah found herself working with an intensity and focus she had rarely experienced, even during the busiest days at the field hospital. These weren't soldiers who had been injured in combat. These were families who had simply been caught in the wrong place when war came to their region. Children who didn't understand why they were suffering. Parents who were desperate to help their sick family members. Elderly people who remembered when the village had been prosperous and peaceful. As the morning progressed, Sarah began to understand why Dr. Hassan had made his unusual request. These people weren't enemies or allies in the military sense. They were simply human beings who needed medical care. Their suffering had nothing to do with politics or territorial disputes or military objectives. It was the result of a healthcare system that had collapsed under the pressure of ongoing conflict. Dr. Williams was treating a young boy with a severe case of pneumonia when he called Sarah over to consult on the case. "This kid needs hospitalization and IV antibiotics," he said quietly. "We can start treatment here, but he's going to need more intensive care than we can provide in a village clinic." Sarah examined the boy, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. His breathing was labored, his fever was dangerously high, and his oxygen saturation was well below normal levels. Without proper treatment, he would likely die within days. We could take him back to our hospital, Sarah suggested. It would mean transporting a civilian patient, but it's a medical emergency. His mother would have to come with him, Dr. Williams pointed out. And we'd be taking civilian refugees into a military medical facility. That's going to raise all kinds of questions. Sarah looked at the boy's mother, a woman probably in her 30s who was clearly terrified that her son might die. The decision wasn't really about military regulations or proper procedures. It was about whether they were willing to let a child die because helping him would create administrative complications. We'll figure out the paperwork later, Sarah decided. Right now, this kid needs medical care that we can provide. As they prepared to transport the boy and his mother back to the field hospital, Sarah realized that this day had fundamentally changed her understanding of military medicine. She had always known that wars affected civilian populations, but she had never before been directly involved in treating non-combatants who were suffering because of the collapse of civilian medical infrastructure. The return journey was tense because they now had additional passengers who would be at risk if they encountered hostile forces. But once again, their routes seemed to be protected by unseen guardians. They encountered no obstacles, no armed groups, no signs of enemy activity. As the field hospital came into view, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A routine deployment had turned into an unexpected dialogue with an enemy doctor, which had led to an unauthorized humanitarian mission that was now bringing civilian refugees to a military medical facility. She had no idea what kind of official reaction her actions would provoke, or whether she would face disciplinary action for exceeding her authority. But looking at the sick child sleeping in his mother's arms in the back seat, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes the commitment to healing required taking risks that went beyond official policies and military regulations. The war would continue with all its complexities and moral ambiguities. But for one day, in one small village, medicine had transcended the boundaries created by conflict, proving that the commitment to preserve life could bridge even the deepest divisions between people who might otherwise be enemies.